When I opened my eyes to find a wolf's amber gaze inches from my face, my first thought wasn't fear. It was gratitude. The memory came flooding back, the cliff edge crumbling beneath my boots, the sickening drop through pine branches, the world going black. Now I lay on a bed of moss and pine needles, my left leg positioned at an unnatural angle that made my stomach turn. Blood had dried on my forehead, but the bleeding had stopped. Something, had placed straight branches alongside my leg, secured with strips of fabric that looked suspiciously like they'd been torn from my own jacket. Two wolves circled me like silent guardians. The larger one, a magnificent creature with pale, silver-white fur, watched the forest with ears pricked for danger. The younger male, darker with unsettling ice-blue eyes, pressed his warm body against my side, sharing his heat. My satellite phone lay shattered 20 feet away. No rescue was coming. Yet somehow, impossibly, I was still alive, and I wasn't alone. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. I've carried the weight of 3 generations on my shoulders since I was 16 years old. That's when the drunk driver crossed the center line on Route 87 and turned my parents' sedan into twisted metal and shattered glass. The driver walked away without a scratch. My parents didn't walk away at all. Grandmother Margaret became my entire world after that. She was 74 then, with hands that never stopped moving, always tending to some injured creature, always documenting something in those leather journals she kept stacked by her reading chair. She taught me that grief doesn't have an expiration date, but it does have a choice. You can let it calcify into bitterness, or you can transform it into purpose. I chose purpose, or at least I tried to. At 28, I'm 3 weeks into a solo research expedition in the Adirondack Mountains, collecting data for my PhD dissertation on wildlife ecology. The academic pressure is crushing. Student loans totaling $180,000, a fellowship that expires if I don't finish this year, and the gnawing suspicion that I'm chasing my grandmother's dreams instead of my own. But there's another weight I'm carrying, one I haven't told anyone about. I'm 6 weeks pregnant. The father, ex-boyfriend really, left 2 months ago when I told him I was considering keeping it. "You're married to your research," he said. "There's no room in your life for a real relationship, let alone a kid." Maybe he was right. I don't know. I came out here partly to avoid making that decision. Uncle Daniel hasn't spoken to me in 3 years, not since grandmother's final lucid day when she begged him to stop his crusade against the wolves. He's my father's younger brother, 48 now, weathered by grief and obsession. 15 years ago, his 10-year-old son Tommy died on a camping trip. The official report said animal attack. Daniel decided it was wolves. He's been hunting them ever since, working as a wildlife management consultant for Timbercrest Logging Company, which is really just a polite way of saying he helps them eliminate obstacles to development. The family fracture runs deep. Grandmother protecting wolves, Daniel destroying them, and me caught in the middle, trying to honor a woman who 8 months ago stopped recognizing my face. She's still alive, technically. Her body breathes in room 407 at Riverside Memory Care, but the woman who raised me, who taught me to read animal tracks and identify bird calls, she's already gone. The climb should have been routine. I'd rappelled down cliff faces hundreds of times, collecting lichen samples from elevations where most researchers wouldn't bother going. That's what made my dissertation different. I went where others wouldn't. The morning air was crisp, carrying that particular October scent of decomposing leaves and pine resin. I'd left base camp at dawn, hiking 2 miles to reach this particular cliff face where I'd spotted rare lichen species during my preliminary survey. The samples would complete my data set for the eastern sector. I checked my equipment twice the way grandmother had taught me. Rope, carabiners, harness, helmet, everything secure. The cliff dropped 40 feet to a rocky outcrop, then another 20 to the forest floor below. Not an impossible height, but enough to cause serious injury if something went wrong. It was 11:47 a.m. when I began my descent. I noted the time because I'm meticulous about field documentation, every sample tagged with GPS coordinates and timestamp. The autumn sun warmed my back as I walked backward down the cliff face, my boots finding purchase on familiar granite. At 30 feet down, I heard it, a sound like a guitar string popping. The rope jerked. I looked up and saw the problem immediately. The rope was fraying against a sharp edge of rock, individual fibers separating under my weight. I had perhaps 3 seconds to react. Not enough time to climb back up. Not enough time to secure myself to the rock face. Just enough time to think. Nobody knows I'm here. The rope gave way. Time became elastic. I counted 3 heartbeats before I hit the first branch. The pine bough bent under my weight, slowing my fall fractionally before snapping with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. My left leg struck the next branch at an angle that sent lightning bolts of pain through my entire body. Then another branch, this one catching my backpack and spinning me sideways. I hit the ground on my left side. The impact drove the air from my lungs. My head struck something hard, a rock maybe, or exposed root. The world tilted, colors bleeding into each other like watercolors in rain. Pain exploded everywhere at once, but my left leg screamed loudest. Even through the fog of shock, I knew that kind of pain. Something was very broken. My last coherent thought before darkness claimed me was about the baby. 6 weeks and 3 days, barely the size of a lentil, and I'd just fallen 40 feet. Then nothing. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. Dappled sunlight through pine needles, the taste of blood in my mouth, a throbbing in my skull that matched my heartbeat. The pain in my leg had evolved from sharp agony to a deep, nauseating ache that made me want to vomit. I tried to sit up. Bad idea. The world spun violently, and I collapsed back onto the forest floor, gasping. Carefully, moving only my eyes, I assessed my situation. My backpack had somehow stayed on, though the straps had torn partially loose. I could see it beside me, contents spilled across the ground. My phone lay 3 feet away, screen shattered into a spider web of cracks. The emergency beacon that should have been clipped to my belt was nowhere visible. I turned my head slowly, fighting waves of dizziness, to look at my left leg. Even without medical training, I could see it was wrong. The angle, the swelling already beginning, definitely broken, possibly fractured in multiple places. I tried to reach my phone, dragging myself forward with my arms. The movement sent fresh bolts of agony through my leg, and I bit back a scream. After 3 attempts, I managed to grab the phone. The screen was dead. Water damage from my water bottle, which had ruptured in the fall. No phone, no beacon. No way to call for help. I lay back and stared up at the canopy, trying to control my breathing, trying not to panic. The sun's position suggested I'd been unconscious maybe 30 minutes, perhaps an hour. That meant it was early afternoon. I'd told my advisor I'd be out of contact for 3 days. Nobody would come looking for me until Thursday at the earliest. 3 days. With a broken leg, possible concussion, and no way to signal for help. I thought about the baby. Was it still alive? Had the trauma of the fall triggered a miscarriage? I didn't know. Couldn't tell. There was no bleeding that I could see, but that might mean nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd come to the forest to avoid deciding whether to keep this pregnancy, and now I might lose both the choice and the baby. That's when I heard movement in the underbrush. My body went rigid despite the pain. Bears. The Adirondacks had black bears, and autumn was when they fed aggressively before winter. An injured human would smell like easy prey. But the shape that emerged from the tree line wasn't a bear. The wolf was larger than I expected, her coat a pale gray that caught the afternoon light like frost. She moved with deliberate slowness, head low, ears forward. Assessing me, I held perfectly still, remembering everything grandmother had taught me about wolf behavior. Don't make eye contact, don't show fear, make yourself small and non-threatening. My broken leg made the last part easy. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. The wolf, female I could tell from her build, approached to within 10 feet and stopped. Her amber eyes studied me with an intelligence that made my breath catch. This wasn't the blank stare of a predator evaluating prey. This was consideration, judgment. A second wolf appeared, younger and darker, with pale blue eyes that were almost gray. Male, smaller, perhaps 4 years old to the female's 6. He hung back, watching his companion, clearly deferring to her authority. The female took 3 more steps forward. Now she was close enough that I could see the pattern of her fur, the slight graying around her muzzle, and something else, a distinctive scar across her left shoulder, mostly hidden by her coat but visible when she moved. My mind raced. Grandmother's journals. She'd written about a wolf with a scar like that. Luna, she'd called her. The white one who remembers. Luna? I whispered, then immediately regretted speaking. Wolves don't respond to human names. They're wild animals, not dogs, but the female's ears twitched at the sound. She took another step closer, so near now I could smell her. Pine and earth and something wild and ancient. For a long moment we stared at each other, and I swear something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Then she did something that made no logical sense. She lay down beside me, her warm body pressing against my left side, careful to avoid my injured leg. The younger male circled once, then positioned himself on my right side. Within seconds I was sandwiched between 2 wolves, their body heat seeping through my jacket. I should have been terrified. Every survival instinct should have been screaming. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of safety, absurd as that sounds. These wolves weren't here to hurt me. They were here to help. As the afternoon wore on and the temperature began to drop, I understood why. October in the Adirondacks can swing 40 degrees between day and night. Without shelter, without the ability to move, I would have died of hypothermia long before anyone came looking for me. The wolves' body heat was keeping me alive. The younger male, I started calling him Ghost in my mind for his pale blue eyes, eventually stood and disappeared into the forest. Luna stayed, her breathing steady and calm, occasionally shifting position to maintain contact. Ghost returned 20 minutes later with something in his mouth. He dropped it carefully beside my hand, a plastic water bottle, half full, clearly scavenged from some hiker's campsite or trash. The cap was still on. I stared at it, my scientific mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Wolves don't bring gifts. They don't understand human needs. They certainly don't scavenge useful items and present them to injured strangers, unless they'd been taught. With trembling hands, I opened my backpack and pulled out grandmother's journal, the one I'd brought for comfort. I'd read it a dozen times, but now I searched for specific entries, turning pages with difficulty, while Ghost watched with eerie patience. There, June 2016, 8 years ago. Today I found her, the white wolf I've been searching for. She was caught in an illegal trap, leg nearly severed. I freed her, and she looked at me with such trust and pain that I knew I couldn't let her die. I brought her to the cabin. The surgery took 4 hours. I looked at Luna's scarred shoulder, then back at the journal. I call her Luna because she appeared on a full moon night, and because she represents something that needs to remain hidden to survive. I'm teaching her basic commands, not to make her tame, but to give her tools to survive in a world where humans are both her greatest threat and potentially her only allies. My hands shook as I turned more pages, finding entry after entry about Luna's recovery, her release back to the wild, her return visits to the cabin with her pack. And then, 8 months ago, March 15, 2024. Daniel has placed poison traps throughout the eastern sector. I must remove them tonight. Luna's pack has pups this season. I can't let them die because humans don't understand that wolves have just as much right to raise their children as we do. No entries after that date. I closed the journal and looked at Luna, who was watching me with those amber eyes. "You were there," I whispered. "The night grandmother fell, the night everything changed." Luna's ears twitched. Ghost moved closer, pressing his warmth against my side as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Grandmother's Alzheimer's hadn't been natural aging. Something had happened that night in March. Something she'd hidden from everyone. And somehow, these wolves knew. The second day began with the unmistakable signs that my body was losing the fight against infection. I woke shivering despite the wolves' warmth, my mouth dry as cotton, my head pounding. When I touched my forehead, my hand came away slick with sweat. Fever. The red streaks I'd noticed yesterday radiating from my leg wound had spread, angry lines tracking up toward my knee like poisoned rivers. Cellulitis. If it reached my bloodstream, I'd go septic. Without IV antibiotics, septic shock was a death sentence in the wilderness. I had maybe 48 hours before that happened. Luna sensed the change immediately. She stood and paced, her agitation palpable. Ghost whined low in his throat, pressing closer to me as if his body heat alone could cure what was wrong. I appreciated the gesture even as I understood its futility. I needed to take inventory. My backpack had spilled during the fall, but most items were recoverable. I dragged it closer, biting back whimpers as the movement jarred my leg. Inside, energy bars, first aid kit, water purification tablets, extra socks, emergency blanket, and grandmother's journal. The first aid kit contained alcohol wipes, gauze, basic pain relievers, and a small tube of antibiotic ointment that would do exactly nothing against the infection spreading through my system. What I needed was in a hospital, IV antibiotics, proper wound irrigation, probably surgery to set the bone. What I had was 2 wolves and the supplies in my backpack. Ghost suddenly stood and trotted into the forest. Luna remained, but her attention was fixed on the direction he'd gone, ears pricked forward. 10 minutes later, he returned carrying a small cloth bag in his mouth, careful not to puncture it with his teeth. He dropped it at my feet. Inside were items that made my scientific understanding of wolf behavior crack and splinter. Alcohol wipes in sealed packets, a roll of medical gauze, and a tube of antibiotic ointment that wasn't expired. These weren't scavenged from random trash. These were from a cache, carefully maintained and recently stocked. Grandmother's cache. I looked at Ghost with new understanding. She taught you where the supplies are. She taught you to bring specific items when someone is hurt. Ghost cocked his head, those pale blue eyes fixed on mine with uncomfortable intensity. I'd spent years studying animal cognition, knew the dangers of anthropomorphizing, understood that what looked like understanding might just be conditioned response. But the precision of his actions suggested something more sophisticated than simple training. I cleaned my wound as best I could with the supplies, fighting waves of nausea as I peeled back my torn pant leg to expose the injury. The break was clean, at least. I could see the bone hadn't punctured skin. That was the only good news. The surrounding tissue was swollen, discolored, hot to the touch. The infection was aggressive. While I worked, I opened Grandmother's journal again, this time reading more carefully. The entries about Luna weren't just observations. They were training logs. Day 47. Luna responded to hand signal for stay even at 100 yards. Her ability to understand and execute complex commands exceeds any canine I've worked with. Tomorrow, I'll test whether she can differentiate between first aid items. Day 89. Success. Showed Luna the difference between gauze and rope. She retrieved gauze 3 times out of 3 attempts. Ghost, her son, approximately 8 months old, watches everything. He's learning by observation. Day 134. Established 3 supply caches throughout the eastern sector. Both wolves now know locations. Tested Ghost's retrieval skills. He successfully brought back water bottle, medical tape, and energy bars on separate commands. I'm not training pets. I'm creating a safety net for anyone who might need help in these woods. The dates were from 5 to 6 years ago. Grandmother had been 76, 77 years old, hiking alone into the wilderness to train wolves in emergency response. The audacity of it, the brilliant madness made my throat tight. But why? What had driven her to create this elaborate system? I kept reading, and the answer emerged slowly, painfully, through entries scattered across years. Daniel threatened me today, said if I didn't stop protecting those killers, he'd make sure the logging company got its permits approved. I told him Tommy would be ashamed. He told me I had no right to speak his son's name. Found 3 more poison traps. Daniel is escalating. The wolves are learning to recognize the scent of strychnine, avoiding the traps, but what about the other animals? Found 2 dead foxes last week. I'm 81 years old. I won't be able to do this much longer. Sarah is the only one who might continue this work, but she doesn't know. How do I tell her that her uncle is destroying the very ecosystem she's studying? How do I tell her that family is sometimes the greatest threat? And then, the final entries, dated March 2024. March 14th. Daniel has placed traps throughout Luna's denning area. She has 4 pups, barely 2 weeks old. If I don't remove those traps tonight, the pups will die. I know I shouldn't go alone. I know I'm too old. But there's no one else. March 15th, 2:17 a.m. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about Tommy. He was such a sweet child. Loved animals. Would bring me injured birds, crying over their broken wings. What happened to that boy after Tommy died? Grief is a poison worse than anything Daniel puts in those traps. March 15th, 11:30 p.m. It's done. Found Luna caught in a trap, leg bleeding but not broken. She recognized me, let me free her. Daniel was there. We stared at each other across the clearing. For a moment I saw my nephew again, the boy who used to bring me wildflowers. Then his face closed and he left. I fell during the hike back. Hit my head on something. Dizzy, everything spinning. Can't quite remember. The entry ended mid-sentence, the handwriting deteriorating into illegible scrawl. My hand shook as I lowered the journal. Grandmother hadn't developed Alzheimer's naturally. She'd sustained a traumatic brain injury, probably a subdural hematoma, and refused treatment. The rapid cognitive decline that followed wasn't disease. It was preventable brain damage that she'd hidden from everyone. She'd died saving Luna. And Luna was here now, 8 months later, protecting me. The poetry of it was almost too much to bear. A sound in the distance made all 3 of us freeze, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors, still far away but approaching. Luna's hackles rose. Ghost moved to position himself between me and the sound, his body tense. This was wrong. Search and rescue helicopters made regular patterns, called out on loudspeakers. This was a single pass, moving fast, no announcements, and I hadn't activated an emergency beacon because mine was lost somewhere in the fall. "Luna," I whispered, testing a theory. "Hide." The wolf immediately moved toward the tree line, melting into shadows with Ghost following. They didn't go far, maybe 20 feet, but they became nearly invisible among the undergrowth. Conditioned response to a command, Grandmother had taught them. The helicopter passed overhead, low enough that I could see it wasn't marked with search and rescue insignia. It was civilian, probably chartered. It circled the area once, then moved on. Someone was searching these woods, but not for me, for the wolves. I waited until the sound faded completely before calling Luna and Ghost back. They emerged cautiously, and I noticed something I'd missed before. Luna wore a collar. Not a thick leather one that would be obvious, but a thin band that blended with her fur. I'd taken it for a natural color variation, but now I could see the slight difference in texture. A tracking collar. GPS, probably. Someone was monitoring Luna's location. The implications cascaded through my mind like dominoes falling. If someone was tracking Luna, they knew she'd been stationary in this location for over 24 hours. They'd come to investigate, and if they found me with her... Daniel's words from 3 years ago came back to me. Those wolves are dangerous. One day they'll attack someone and everyone will finally see I was right. What better proof than his own niece, found injured with wolves nearby? I had to move. Broken leg or not, infection or not, staying here meant turning Luna and Ghost into scapegoats for an accident they'd had nothing to do with. Worse, it meant handing Daniel the evidence he needed to justify eliminating them. "Okay," I said aloud, forcing myself to think through the pain and fever. "Okay, we need a plan." Luna sat on her haunches, watching me with those intelligent amber eyes. Ghost remained standing, alert, ready. I consulted the map in my backpack, trying to remember the terrain. Grandmother's cabin was marked in her journal, 2 miles northwest, hidden in a ravine that didn't appear on official park maps. If I could reach it, I'd have better shelter, more supplies, and maybe a way to communicate that didn't involve GPS tracking. 2 miles, with a broken leg, through forest terrain. It was impossible. I looked at the wolves, at the supplies Ghost had retrieved, at the journal entry describing how Luna had let grandmother treat her wounds because she understood the human was trying to help. Maybe not impossible, just improbable. "I need splints," I said, pointing to my leg, then to straight branches nearby. "Straight. Strong." Ghost cocked his head. I repeated the gesture, crawling toward the nearest suitable branch, demonstrating what I needed. Pain exploded through my leg, but I ignored it, focusing on the task. Ghost watched, then trotted into the forest. He returned 5 minutes later, dragging a branch that was remarkably close to what I needed, straight, thumb-thick, about 2 feet long. Luna brought a second one. Using gauze from the cache and strips torn from my jacket, I created a better splint than my initial attempt, immobilizing my leg from ankle to mid-thigh. It wasn't hospital quality, but it would prevent further damage during movement. The hard part was standing. I used a larger branch as a crutch, levering myself upright in stages, each movement accompanied by waves of agony that made my vision gray at the edges. Fever sweat poured down my face. My leg screamed, but I was vertical. "Northwest," I said, pointing in what I hoped was the right direction. "Cabin. We need to go to the cabin." Luna immediately started walking in that direction, looking back to ensure I was following. Ghost positioned himself on my injured side, close enough that I could steady myself against him if needed. We moved at perhaps half a mile per hour, stopping frequently for me to rest and fight back nausea. The forest passed in a blur of pain and fever dreams. Sometimes I was aware of my surroundings, the particular slant of afternoon light through pine needles, the distant cry of a hawk. Other times I was somewhere else entirely. 8 years old, learning to identify animal tracks with grandmother in these same woods. 16, standing at my parents' funeral, feeling grandmother's hand solid on my shoulder. 22, graduating with my master's degree, seeing her face in the crowd, proud and beaming. "I'm sorry," I mumbled at one point, not sure if I was talking to grandmother, to the baby I might be losing, or to the wolves guiding me through the forest. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry for all of it. Luna turned back and made a soft sound, not quite a whine, more like acknowledgement. Then she continued forward, patient and steady. The sun was setting when we heard voices ahead. Male, professional, coordinated. Luna and Ghost froze. I leaned heavily on my makeshift crutch, trying to stay conscious, trying to think through the fever fog. Tracks here, 2 wolves, adult size, and human boot prints, irregular gait. She's with them. Mitchell was right. They've got his niece. Command wants them alive if possible. Tranquilizer darts first. But if they show aggression toward the human, take them down. Take them down. Kill them. I wanted to scream that the wolves hadn't hurt me, that they'd saved my life, but I couldn't form words. The fever had reached the point where reality felt thin and unreliable. Luna looked at me, then at Ghost. Some communication passed between them, mother to son, alpha to pack member. Ghost whined softly in protest. Luna's response was firm. Ghost gently pressed against my good side, his meaning clear. Lean on me. Luna melted into the forest, drawing the men's attention away from us with deliberate noise, sacrificing herself to buy us time. There, northwest quadrant. Footsteps crashing through underbrush, moving away from us. Ghost guided me in the opposite direction, supporting my weight, moving with careful deliberation. Every step was agony, every breath felt like inhaling fire. But we kept moving, putting distance between ourselves and the search team. I don't know how long we walked. Time became meaningless, measured only in pain and the steady presence of Ghost beside me. At some point, the terrain changed, less dense forest, more rocky ground. A ravine opened before us, steep-sided and shadowed. And there, built into the hillside and camouflaged with moss and small trees, was Grandmother's cabin. Ghost led me to the door. I fumbled with the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it opened easily. Inside was darkness and the smell of old wood and herbs. I made it 3 steps inside before my legs gave out completely. I collapsed onto something soft, a cot maybe, or cushions, and consciousness slipped away like water through my fingers. The last thing I heard was Ghost's howl, long and mournful, calling to his mother across the darkening forest. I woke to lamplight and a man's voice speaking softly in a language I didn't immediately recognize. Then, "Easy, easy. You're safe. Don't try to move yet." My eyes struggled to focus. The cabin's interior was small but well organized, shelves lined with books and medical supplies, a wood stove radiating warmth, maps covering one wall. A man in his 50s knelt beside the cot where I lay, checking my pulse with professional efficiency. "Who?" My voice came out as a croak. "Dr. William Crawford. Most people call me Will." He released my wrist and reached for a thermometer. "Under your tongue. And before you ask, Ghost came and found me about 2 hours ago. Smart animal. Wouldn't leave until I followed him here. Ghost. Luna." The memories flooded back. The search team. Luna drawing them away. The agonizing journey to the cabin. "Where's Luna? Is she—" "She's fine. Circled back about an hour ago. Both wolves are outside keeping watch." He read the thermometer and his mouth tightened. 104.2. "That's dangerous territory, Sarah. How long have you been running a fever? You know my name. Your grandmother and I were close. A long time ago." Something in his voice suggested close didn't quite cover it. "She talked about you constantly. Showed me pictures. I've been tracking Luna's GPS collar for research purposes, saw she'd been stationary for nearly 2 days. came to investigate and found Ghost waiting at the trailhead like he knew exactly where I'd appear. He was already setting up an IV line with practiced hands, hanging a bag of clear fluid from a hook on the wall. This is lactated ringers for dehydration, plus broad-spectrum antibiotics. Your leg needs proper medical attention, hospital attention. But first, we need to get your fever down and stabilize the infection. I watched him work, my mind struggling through the fever fog to make sense of this. You're a doctor? Veterinarian, technically, but the principles are similar. Plus, Margaret taught me a few things about emergency field medicine over the years. He slid the needle into my arm with minimal pain. We worked together on wildlife conservation. That's how we met. 30 years ago, I was 26, and stupid enough to think age didn't matter when you were in love. The admission hung in the air between us. I studied his face, weathered, kind, carrying the weight of old regrets. You and grandmother were... We had an affair, brief, intense, ended badly. He adjusted the IV drip. I was married at the time. Not proud of that. My wife found out, divorced me. Margaret chose duty to family over scandal. Married someone else. Your grandfather. I left the region, spent 25 years in Alaska trying to forget her. But you came back. She called me 2 years ago. Said she was getting old, needed someone to watch over something precious. He gestured toward the cabin's interior. This place, the wolves, the evidence she'd been collecting, and you, though she didn't say that directly, just asked me to keep an eye on her granddaughter who was too brave for her own good. The IV fluid was cool in my veins, already making me feel marginally more human. The search team earlier, they weren't looking for me. They were hunting Luna and Ghost. Will's expression darkened. Timber Crest Logging Company. They've been running illegal operations in this sector for years, trying to eliminate the wolf population so they can fast-track development permits. Protected species are inconvenient when you're trying to clear-cut old-growth forest. Daniel works for them. Daniel is their perfect tool. Will checked my leg, his hands gentle but thorough. Broken tibia, definitely needs surgical pinning. The infection is deep. You're looking at IV antibiotics for at least a week, maybe more. But what's more urgent is getting you out of here safely without exposing Luna and Ghost. He paused, meeting my eyes. There's something else you need to know. The rope that failed. I examined what was left of it at your fall site. The fraying pattern was from repeated stress against rock. But there were also signs of intentional weakening. Someone filed partial cuts into the rope's core, enough that it would fail under your weight but look like natural wear. The cabin seemed to tilt. Someone tried to kill me? Or at minimum tried to ensure you'd have an accident serious enough to get you out of the forest. With you gone, there's no one actively researching wolf populations in this sector. No one to testify if Timbercrest tries to claim the wolves are dangerous. Daniel wouldn't. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Would he? 3 years of not speaking. 15 years of obsessive wolf hatred. How far would grief push someone? I don't think it was Daniel directly, Will said carefully, but Timbercrest has a lot of contractors. A lot of people with reason to want interference eliminated. He gestured to a laptop on the desk. Margaret documented everything. 15 years of illegal wolf killings, poison traps, falsified wildlife reports. She was building a federal case. That's what got her killed. She had Alzheimer's. She had a traumatic brain injury she refused to treat. Will pulled up files on the laptop, medical records I shouldn't have been able to see, but somehow he'd accessed. ER visit March 16th, head CT showing subdural hematoma. She signed herself out against medical advice. Cognitive decline started immediately after. You don't get Alzheimer's in 3 weeks, Sarah. You get it from untreated brain trauma. The room swam. Fever, shock, grief. I couldn't separate them. Why wouldn't she get treatment? Because she couldn't explain how she got injured without admitting she was removing illegal traps from Timbercrest property at 82 years old. Because getting police involved would mean investigations that might reach Daniel before she could figure out how to protect him from his own choices. Will pulled up a video file. She left this, recorded the night before her injury. On screen, grandmother sat in this same cabin looking tired but lucid. Her voice was steady. "This is in case I don't make it. Daniel has placed poison traps throughout the eastern sector. Strychnine, illegal but impossible to trace. Luna's pack has new pups. I can't let him murder babies." I watched, tears streaming down my face as she continued, "I know the risks. I'm too old to be doing this alone, but there's no one else. Will is in Alaska. Sarah is at school. These wolves have no one but me." Her eyes found the camera with terrible clarity. "If you're watching this, Sarah, something went wrong. I need you to understand, Luna isn't just a wolf. She represents everything your generation needs to learn. We're not separate from nature. We're part of it. When we destroy wolves, we destroy ourselves." Then, quieter, "And I need you to know about Daniel. He's not evil. He's in pain. Tommy's death broke something in him that never healed. If you can find the coroner's report from that day, you'll understand why I couldn't hate him even when he hated me." The video ended abruptly. "There's more," Will said, pulling up another file. Text entry from March 16th, typed with obvious difficulty. I read grandmother's words describing freeing Luna from a trap, Daniel witnessing it, their silent confrontation, the entry about falling, hitting her head, growing confused, mid-sentence. "She died trying to save Luna," I whispered, "and Luna came back to save me." Wolves have long memories. And Luna learned from the best. Will adjusted my IV. Which brings us to our current problem. Timbercrest knows Luna is here. They're searching with thermal imaging, tranquilizer darts, probably kill authorizations if the wolves show any aggression. We have maybe 12 hours before they expand the search grid to include this cabin. So we run? You can barely walk. Luna just gave birth. There are 4 pups in a den about half a mile from here. Ghost showed me. She can't travel with newborns. He pulled up a satellite map on the laptop. But there might be another option. Margaret wasn't just collecting evidence. She was preparing to go public. Federal prosecutors, environmental agencies, media contacts, everything's here, encrypted, ready to transmit. Then transmit it. It's not that simple. The evidence implicates dozens of Timbercrest employees, including several state officials who approved illegal permits. If we release it prematurely without proper legal framework, it gets buried. We need a federal investigation already underway or a media outlet committed to publishing regardless of pressure. He looked at me seriously. And we need testimony from someone who can explain why Margaret died collecting this evidence. Someone who understands the ecosystem, who can speak to the scientific importance of wolf conservation, someone whose academic credentials and family connection to the victim make them impossible to dismiss. You want me to testify? I want you to finish what Margaret started. But first we need to get you medical attention without exposing Luna's location. And we need to do it before Timbercrest figures out you're not just a random injured hiker. You're Margaret Mitchell's granddaughter, researching the same wolves your uncle has spent 15 years trying to eliminate. Outside, Luna howled, long, mournful, ancient. Ghost answered, and somewhere in the distance, other wolves joined the chorus. Pack song, carrying across the mountains. They're calling the others, Will said softly. Warning them, maybe. Or mourning. Wolves understand loss better than we give them credit for. I closed my eyes, feeling the IV fluid cool in my veins. feeling the fever still burning through my body, feeling something else. Rage, maybe, or determination. Grandmother had died for these wolves, had died keeping secrets to protect a nephew who'd spent years destroying what she loved. "Tell me about the coroner's report," I said. "The one Grandmother mentioned. What didn't anyone tell Daniel about how Tommy really died?" Will's face went still. "Are you sure you want to know? Once I tell you, you can't unknow it. And it changes everything about why Daniel has been doing this." "Tell me." He opened another file, and I saw the truth that had been hidden for 15 years. The truth that explained everything and made it all so much worse. The coroner's report filled the laptop screen, clinical language describing a 10-year-old boy's final hours. I read it twice, my fever-addled brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Primary cause of death: timber rattlesnake envenomation. Secondary finding: anaphylactic shock. Time of death: approximately 6 to 8 hours before body discovery. Evidence of post-mortem animal scavenging. Yes, consistent with opportunistic feeding by wolves, coyotes, and ravens. "Tommy died from a snake bite," I whispered. "Not wolves." "A rattlesnake bite he got while trying to pee behind a tree at night," Will said quietly. "The venom caused massive system failure. He probably died within 3 to 4 hours, alone, while Daniel was asleep in their tent 20 feet away." The horror of it settled over me like a shroud. A little boy, dying slowly in the dark, too weak to call for help, and his father, exhausted from hiking, sleeping through his son's death. The bite marks Daniel saw happened after Tommy was already dead. Wolves scavenging a corpse, which is normal behavior. They didn't kill him, they just found him. Will pulled up photographs from the scene. The original coroner told Daniel this, explained the timeline, the venom in Tommy's system, the dead snake found nearby that Tommy had killed with a rock. But Daniel didn't believe it. Daniel couldn't believe it, because if wolves didn't kill Tommy, then there was no one to blame except himself for falling asleep, for not hearing his son in distress, for failing to protect him. Will's voice was heavy with old grief. The coroner meant to be kind, I think. Closed the case as accidental death by animal attack to spare the family additional pain. No one thought Daniel would interpret that as permission to wage a 15-year war against wolves. I thought about Uncle Daniel at family gatherings before Tommy died, quick to laugh, gentle with children, the uncle who taught me to skip stones and identify constellations, and after, silent, hollow-eyed, avoiding everyone's gaze. We'd all assumed it was normal grief. No one had known he was nursing a vendetta based on a fundamental misunderstanding. "Grandmother knew," I said. "That's what she meant in the video. She couldn't hate him because she understood he was destroying himself over a lie. Margaret tried to tell him multiple times. He wouldn't listen. Called her a liar, said she was protecting killers, accused her of dishonoring Tommy's memory." Will closed the laptop. Eventually, she stopped trying to convince him and started trying to protect what he was destroying. The wolves, the forest, the truth itself. Outside, Ghost whined softly. Luna's answering sound was lower, more urgent. Will moved to the window, peered through a gap in the curtains. "We have company." My heart lurched. Timbercrest? Worse, Daniel. Through the window I could see my uncle standing at the edge of the clearing, rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked older than I remembered, gaunt, weathered, his face carved by 15 years of obsessive purpose. He wasn't moving toward the cabin, just standing there staring at Luna and Ghost, who stood between him and the door in protective stances. "I should go out there," I said, trying to sit up. Pain and dizziness immediately forced me back down. "You can barely stand. You're running a 104-degree fever with a broken leg and septic infection." Will's hand was gentle but firm on my shoulder. "Let me talk to him first. He's my uncle, and he spent 15 years trying to kill wolves." I'm not letting you walk into a confrontation with an armed man while you're this vulnerable." Will moved toward the door, then paused. "Margaret loved him, you know, even after everything. She kept a photo of Tommy on her desk at the memory care facility, looked at it every day, even when she couldn't remember her own name anymore." He opened the door and stepped out. I could hear their voices, but not the words. I dragged myself to the window, ignoring my body's protests, needing to see. Daniel's rifle was pointed at the ground, but his hand rested on it. Will stood on the cabin's small porch, hands visible, non-threatening. Luna and Ghost maintained their position between the two men, not aggressive but unmistakably protective. The conversation went on for several minutes. I saw Daniel's face change, confusion, then anger, then something that might have been devastation. Will gestured toward the cabin, toward me, presumably. Daniel shook his head violently. Then Will said something that made Daniel's knees buckle. He caught himself on a tree, the rifle sliding from his shoulder to hang forgotten from its strap. His mouth moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the shape of a scream. Luna took 3 steps forward. Not aggressive, almost sympathetic. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in 15 years, seeing a wolf instead of a monster. His face crumpled. He sank to the ground, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking with sobs that came from somewhere so deep they seemed to be tearing him apart from the inside. Will told him the truth. About Tommy, about the snake, about 15 years of revenge aimed at the wrong target. Ghost moved closer to Daniel, not threatening, just present. Daniel looked up at the young wolf through his tears, and something passed between them that I couldn't name. Recognition, maybe, or the shared understanding of grief that transcends species. Daniel's voice carried across the clearing, broken and raw. "What have I done? Oh God, what have I done?" The question hung in the autumn air like smoke. Luna sat on her haunches, watching this broken man with those ancient amber eyes. Ghost remained close, as if guarding Daniel from himself. And I understood, finally, what Grandmother had been trying to protect all along. Not just the wolves, not just the forest, but Daniel himself, her nephew, the boy who'd once brought her wild flowers, the man whose grief had metastasized into something that was killing him as surely as it killed everything he touched. Will walked back toward the cabin. When he opened the door, his eyes were wet. "He knows," Will said simply. "And he's asking to see you." Daniel came into the cabin like a man walking to his own execution. His eyes were red, face blotchy from crying, hands trembling. He stopped just inside the doorway, looking at me on the cot with my IV line and splinted leg, and something in his expression shattered further. "Sarah," his voice was hoarse, "I didn't know you were hurt. I've been so focused on the wolves that I didn't even know you were in the forest." "Sit down before you fall down," Will said, not unkindly, pulling up a chair. Daniel sat heavily. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Outside, I could hear Luna and Ghost moving around the cabin's perimeter, their presence a constant reminder of why we were all here. "Will told you," I said. Not a question. "About Tommy, about the snake, about how I've been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. 15 years? I've spent 15 years killing innocent animals because I couldn't face the truth. You didn't know. I knew. The words came out harsh, self-lacerating. The coroner told me, showed me the toxicology report, the timeline, everything. I couldn't accept it. Because if wolves didn't kill Tommy, then he died while I was asleep 20 feet away. He died alone, probably calling for me. And I didn't hear him. His hands clenched into fists. What kind of father sleeps through his own son dying? What kind of father fails so completely at the one thing that matters? The kind who was exhausted from hiking all day with a 10-year-old, Will said quietly. The kind who had no reason to think anything was wrong. The kind who is human. I should have heard him. Snake venom causes paralysis, I said, my voice shaky from fever and emotion. Tommy probably couldn't call out, couldn't move. It wasn't your fault, Uncle Daniel, and it wasn't the wolves' fault. It was just a terrible accident. Daniel looked at me, and I saw the little girl's uncle I remembered, the one who'd taught me to fish, who'd lifted me onto his shoulders at the county fair, who'd cried at my parents' funeral and promised he'd always be there for me. Somewhere in the intervening years, that man had gotten lost in grief and rage. Margaret tried to tell me, he whispered. For years she tried. I called her a liar. I said she was protecting killers. He stopped, swallowed hard. The night she fell, I was there. Will and I both went still. She was removing traps I'd placed. I saw her free Luna from one of them. We stared at each other across the clearing, and I saw the disappointment in her eyes. Not anger, just disappointment. Like I'd let her down so profoundly, she didn't even have words for it. His voice broke. She didn't say anything, just finished freeing the wolf and started walking away. She was limping. I think she'd hurt herself getting the trap open, but she wouldn't let me help, wouldn't even acknowledge I was there. You let her walk away, I said. 82 years old, injured, alone in the forest at night. I watched her until she was out of sight. Then I left, went home, told myself she'd be fine, that she was always fine, that she'd been doing this kind of thing for years. He looked at his hands. 3 days later, I heard she'd been admitted to Riverside Memory Care with advanced Alzheimer's. Except it wasn't Alzheimer's, was it? It was a brain injury she got that night, removing my traps, saving wolves from me. The silence that followed was profound. I killed her, Daniel said flatly. Maybe not with my own hands, but I killed her as surely as if I'd pushed her down myself. And I did it while trying to avenge a son who was never killed by wolves in the first place. You didn't kill her, I said, though the words felt inadequate. She made her own choices. She chose to protect wolves from me because I'd become the kind of man who puts poison traps where wolf pups den. She chose to risk her life because I'd made myself into something she had to stop. He looked up at me, eyes hollow. Do you know what the worst part is? I gave Timbercrest all my research. Every wolf den location, every migration pattern, every piece of information Margaret had spent years collecting. I handed it to them because they told me they were conducting humane wildlife management. They were using you, Will said. They knew the truth about Tommy, and they used your grief as a weapon. I let them. That's what I can't forgive. Daniel's voice hardened with something like resolve. I was so obsessed with revenge that I didn't question why a logging company needed such detailed information about wolf populations. Didn't ask why they were paying me so much to consult. Didn't wonder why they kept encouraging me to escalate when I started having doubts. He stood abruptly, pacing the small cabin. Last month I started asking questions. Why did they need GPS coordinates for every wolf den? Why were they so interested in Luna specifically? That's when I realized they were tracking her. Had been for months. And when her collar showed her staying in one location for 48 hours, they assumed she'd found something worth investigating, Will finished. Or someone. They were planning to come after her. I didn't know you were here, Sarah. I swear I didn't know. I came to warn whoever Luna was protecting, to try to... He trailed off, helpless. Through the window I could see Luna sitting at the clearing's edge, Ghost beside her. Both wolves were facing the forest, alert to something I couldn't perceive. They're coming, Will said, following my gaze. Timbercrest security. They'll have tracked Luna's collar here by now. Daniel's jaw set with determination. Then we need to move. Both of you. I know another cabin, deeper in the mountains. No GPS tracking, completely off-grid. Margaret showed it to me years ago before. He gestured vaguely at the wreckage of their relationship. I can't travel, I said, gesturing to my leg and IV. And Luna just gave birth. There are 4 pups half a mile from here. She can't abandon them. Then we make a stand here. Daniel checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. Will, what's Margaret's evidence situation? Can we transmit it remotely? Already uploaded to a secure server with Dead Man's Switch, Will said. If I don't check in every 12 hours, it automatically sends to federal prosecutors, EPA, and 3 major newspapers. Good. That's good. Daniel moved to the window, scanning the tree line. They'll come with tranquilizers first. Pretend it's a rescue operation. But if Luna or Ghost show any protective behavior toward Sarah, they'll claim dangerous wildlife and switch to live rounds. So we don't let them see the wolves, I said. Luna and Ghost hide. We tell them I fell, broke my leg, found this cabin by accident. They won't believe you found this cabin by accident, Will countered. It's not on any maps. You'd have to know it exists. Then I followed Margaret's old journals, which is true. I pulled grandmother's leather journal from my backpack. This has coordinates, descriptions, everything. I'll say I was trying to understand her work, got injured, used her notes to find shelter. Daniel was shaking his head. They'll still search for the wolves. That's why they're here. Let them search, I said, an idea forming through the fever fog. Let them find the den. But by the time they do, we'll have documented everything, including their illegal entry onto protected land to harass endangered species. Will's eyes lit with understanding. We make them the criminals. Record everything, send it to the same federal prosecutors who'll be receiving Margaret's evidence. They'll have lawyers, Daniel warned, and we'll have the truth. I met his eyes. Isn't that what grandmother died for? The truth? Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Luna and Ghost melted into the forest like smoke, following some silent command between them. Daniel positioned himself at the window, rifle ready but not raised. Will checked my IV, made sure I looked appropriately injured and helpless. I held grandmother's journal against my chest like a talisman. The cavalry was coming, but this time, we were ready. The helicopter landed in the clearing with military precision, rotors beating the air into submission. 3 black SUVs arrived seconds later, disgorging men in tactical gear that seemed excessive for a wildlife management operation. Through the cabin window, I counted 8 personnel, all armed, all moving with coordinated efficiency that spoke of training well beyond Forestry Service standards. Will had positioned a small camera on the windowsill, lens barely visible through a gap in the curtains, recording everything. Daniel stood near the door, rifle conspicuously leaned against the wall, present but not threatening. I remained on the cot, IV line visible, looking as injured and helpless as I actually felt. The knock came hard and authoritative. This is Timbercrest Security. We have authorization to search this structure for dangerous wildlife. Open up. Daniel opened the door slowly, hands visible. My niece is injured. She needs medical evacuation, not your wildlife hunt. The team leader, 50s, crew cut, the kind of man who'd probably been military once, pushed past Daniel into the cabin. His eyes swept the interior, cataloging everything, before settling on me. Sarah Mitchell? At my nod, his expression shifted to something approximating concern. We received reports of a missing researcher. Glad to see you're alive, though you look like hell. What happened? Climbing accident 3 days ago. Rope failed, fell about 40 feet, broke my leg. I gestured to the splint. Found this cabin using my grandmother's old journals. Dr. Crawford arrived yesterday and has been providing medical care. 3 days alone with a broken leg. You're lucky to be alive. The team leader's eyes moved to Will. Dr. Crawford, we've heard about you. Wildlife researcher, formerly worked with Margaret Mitchell. That's right, Will said evenly. And you are? James Reese, head of security for Timbercrest operations in this sector. He turned back to me. Miss Mitchell, I need to ask, have you seen any wolves in the area? We're tracking a pair that may be exhibiting aggressive behavior toward humans. The lie was so smooth it was almost beautiful. But I'd been trained by academics who could sniff out bad research methodology from 300 yards. I've seen no wolves, I said truthfully. Luna and Ghost were currently invisible somewhere in the forest. What makes you think they're aggressive? GPS tracking shows they've been stationary near this cabin for extended periods, unusual behavior that suggests potential denning or territorial aggression. Reese gestured to his team. We need to search the area, relocate them if necessary for public safety. Relocate, Daniel said quietly from the doorway. Is that what you're calling it now? Reese's expression hardened. Mitchell. Didn't expect to see you here. I'm sure you didn't. Daniel's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Tell me, Reese, when exactly were you going to inform me that my niece was in the forest? You've been tracking Luna's collar for 3 days. You knew someone was with her. But you didn't call me. Didn't think I'd want to know that a member of my own family might be in danger. The silence that followed was loaded with things unsaid. Reese recovered quickly. We didn't have positive identification until today. And frankly, Mitchell, given your history, we thought it best to handle the situation professionally. Professionally, Daniel repeated. Right? The way you professionally handled the Riverside incident last year? The one where 3 wolves were shot despite being in a designated protection zone? Reese's jaw tightened. That situation was investigated and cleared. By your own internal review. How convenient. Daniel stepped further into the cabin, his body language shifting from passive to protective. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to arrange immediate medical evacuation for my niece. Then, you're going to leave this area and stop your wolf hunt. Any questions? I don't take orders from consultants. Reese turned to his team. Fan out, search pattern beta. If you find the den, tranquilize the adults. Tag the pups for relocation. You don't have authorization for that, Will said sharply. Gray wolves are federally protected. You'd need permits from Fish and Wildlife Service, environmental impact assessments, tribal consultation. We have authorization from the State Forestry Department for hazardous wildlife removal. Let me see it. Reese pulled out a document, handed it to Will with barely concealed irritation. Will scanned it quickly, then looked up with something like triumph in his eyes. This authorization is for the western sector, not eastern. You're operating outside your permitted area. He held up the paper, which makes this an illegal search and potential harassment of protected species. I'm documenting everything for federal prosecutors. Federal prosecutors? Reese laughed, but it sounded forced. On what grounds? How about 15 years of illegal wolf elimination, falsified wildlife reports, poison traps on federal land? My late partner, Margaret Mitchell, compiled extensive evidence before her death. Evidence that's currently with the EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, and 3 federal judges. Will pulled out his phone, showed a series of sent emails. All transmitted this morning, with special attention to Timbercrest's use of employee grief as motivation for illegal activities. The color drained from Reese's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Call your legal department. Ask them if they've received any interesting communications today. I'll wait. Reese pulled out his radio, stepped outside. Through the window, I watched him speaking urgently into the device, his body language becoming increasingly agitated. His team members glanced at each other, uncertainty creeping into their professional facades. Daniel moved closer to my cot. "How are you holding up?" "Fever's climbing again," I admitted. The adrenaline had masked it temporarily, but now I could feel the heat building under my skin, the edges of my vision starting to blur. Will was right. I need a hospital. "Then that's where you're going." Daniel squeezed my hand gently. "I'm sorry, Sarah. For all of it. For not being there after your parents died. For letting grief turn me into someone Margaret had to fight against. For not protecting you the way I should have. Uncle Daniel, let me finish, please." His eyes were wet. "Tommy would have loved you. You were 7 when he died. Do you remember? He thought you were the coolest big cousin in the world. Used to ask me when we could visit you and Aunt Margaret." I did remember vaguely, a boy with Daniel's smile and Catherine's green eyes, always showing me bugs and interesting rocks, treating me like I was wonderful just for existing. "He wanted to be a veterinarian," Daniel continued. "Said he was going to save all the herd animals. After he died, I destroyed the very things he would have protected. I became the opposite of everything he loved about the world." Outside, Reese was shouting into his radio now, his professional demeanor completely shattered. Several team members had retreated to the vehicles, clearly wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. Will joined us, checking my IV and pulse. "Your fever's 104.8. We need to evacuate now, legal issues or not." "Reese won't authorize his helicopter," Daniel said. "Not with federal investigations opening." "Then I'll call in a favor." Will pulled out a satellite phone. "I know people in Park Service who owe me real search and rescue, not corporate security theater." While Will made the call, I looked out the window at the forest where Luna and Ghost were hidden. Somewhere out there were 4 wolf pups who would grow up in a world slightly less hostile than the one their mother had been born into. If we succeeded, if the evidence held, if justice actually meant something. Reese stormed back into the cabin, his face flushed with rage and fear. "You've destroyed this company. Do you understand that? Hundreds of jobs, millions in investment." "Built on lies and dead wolves," Will interrupted calmly. "Save your speech for the prosecutors. This isn't over." "Actually," Daniel said, standing to his full height, "it is. You used my son's death to justify illegal operations. You manipulated my grief for profit. You let me believe a lie for 15 years because it was useful to you." His voice dropped to something cold and final. "The only question now is whether you run before the federal warrants are issued or whether you're still here when they arrive." Reese looked between the 3 of us, injured researcher, determined scientist, reformed accomplice, and whatever he saw made his decision for him. "You people deserve each other, wasting your lives protecting animals while the real world moves on." He left, his team scrambling to follow. Within minutes, the vehicles were gone, helicopter lifting off with empty passenger seats, leaving us in sudden silence. "Did we just win?" I asked, not quite believing it. "We survived the first battle," Will corrected. "The war's just starting. But yes, Sarah, we won this round." In the distance, I heard Luna howl, not mournful now, but triumphant. Ghost answered, and the forest came alive with pack song. Sometimes we spend years blaming the wrong things for our pain. Daniel spent 15 years hunting wolves for a son's death they didn't cause, while the real enemy was his own unexamined grief. How many of us carry similar burdens? Anger at people who didn't actually hurt us, grudges against circumstances we misunderstood, years wasted fighting battles that were never ours to fight. Sarah's story reminds us that the hardest person to forgive is often ourselves. Daniel had to face that he'd slept through his son's death, that no amount of wolf blood could change that fact, that his rage had only dishonored Tommy's memory. But here's the beautiful truth. It's never too late to stop running from pain and start walking toward healing. Luna didn't hold grudges. She just kept showing up, kept protecting, kept loving, despite humans giving her every reason not to. That's the kind of grace we all need to extend to ourselves and each other. What would your life look like if you forgave yourself for the one thing you've been carrying longest? And who would you become if you stopped punishing others for pain they didn't actually cause? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.